Rolling.
So I try to say something about the story of Aspiration School. I arrived in Pondicherry, I believe it was on the 9th of November 1970. And in those days, to be accepted to Auroville, there was a form to be filled in, and you had to give a photo, and this form and photo had to be given to one of three people. So far as I know, it was Navajata of the Sri Aurobindo Society, André Morisset, the mother's son, who was one of her secretaries for Auroville, and the other was Roger Anger. And my Auroville contact took me to Roger. And I had filled in the form. I never wanted to be a teacher. I come from a family of teachers, and I'd long ago decided that I didn't want to do that. I'd tried teaching in schools, supply teaching in England, just to earn money, and I wasn't good at it, and I didn't like it, and I definitely didn't want to do that. But I had done some work with children, au pair, looking after children in families, things like that, in the course of my checkered history. And when Roger saw those things on the form, he got very excited and he said, "Oh, Mother is pressing us to start a school in Auroville. You can do that," he said. So because he was so keen that I should do that, he took me to see Mother at his time. And it was just 1 week exactly after I arrived, so I think 19th of November. And it seems that Mother said yes, because as I drifted down the stairs in some kind of rosy cloud, he came running after me and said, "Mother says yes, you can go to Auroville and start the school." And then my friend took me to Monsieur André, and Monsieur André agreed that I could go to Aspiration, although he said, "You know, they're living 3 to a hut there." But anyway, he gave me permission to go, and the same day by lunchtime I was settled in Auroville, actually. And the thing was, I didn't feel at all capable. I just arrived. How could I start a school? But I thought, Mother has seen me and she knows what she's doing, and whatever help is necessary, she will give. So I was very relieved when I got to Aspiration to find that there already was a small school there. This small school was being run by Rod Hemsel, who's here again now, and a very nice German lady called Ursula Pflug. And they were doing classes and activities for the children who were living in Aspiration in those days. Later I can give you the names if you like. And the first generation of integrated families, children. That is to say, the families from the local villages who've been accepted as Aurovillians, their elder children. So it was just a handful, 6 or 8 kids in the Keat hut where Rod was living. There the activities were going on. So that was a relief. I just joined them and learned from them and did what they did, and that went on, I suppose, just for a couple of weeks before we heard that in fact Aspiration School is going to be opened on 16th of December, and that Norman Dowsett, has been put in charge. He was an Englishman who'd been in the ashram for many, many years. He was working in the Center of Education, and it had been decided that he's in charge of Aspiration School. And the people in Aspiration, a team of people, Vincenzo and Jean-Claude, hastily put up a keyed hut that was to accommodate the school. So on 16th December, Andreda came and cut the ribbon and gave the message. It was the message about the 4 languages. Mother had been asked which languages will be taught in Auroville School.
Okay.
And she had mentioned the 4 languages. Tamil as the local language, English as the international language, French and Sanskrit as the future language of India. So perhaps it was actually only the next day that the students came. So there was a school bus, a blue bus, which collected the children from their various locations and brought them to the school in the morning. So some of these were children whose families had been accepted for Auroville but still weren't living in Auroville. They were in Pondicherry. So in Pondicherry there was quite an Auroville setup. There was not only an Auroville office, there was an Auroville dining room and Prosperity. That was all run by Prabhaben. So the children used to have their breakfast there in the morning, and then the bus would pick them up, and it went up the Jitma Road past Promise. There were several children living. Indra and Beatty's children, Piero and Gloria were living in Promise in those days, Marta. And there was a French family living at Oro Orchard, their son Raphael. And then it kind of did the rounds in Auroville, picked up Shama's 3 kids, Renu, Teddy, Hero, at Certitude Corner. And I don't remember who else all were there. So as I say, I think on the first day there were 35 children from these various different sources, including our integrated families' children. So a mixture, local Indians, Indians from other parts of India, and children of mixed Western origin. And that remained the mix, and roughly 1/3 each, so far as I am aware, through the history of Aspiration School. Of course, we had the Tibetans. I'll come to the Tibetans later. And on the first morning, I was trying to remember who were that motley collection of volunteers who were going to work with the children. Rod, of course, was there, Ursula, myself. Christoph was living in Aspiration in those days. Savitra, I don't know whether he was there on the very first day, but anyway, he became a kind of mainstay of the school. Anand Reddy very soon joined us. And somebody else just flashed into me. Oh, Elia. Elia and her husband and daughter were living in Aspiration, so Anju was one of the first children. And Norman felt it's good that from the very beginning we try to do all the languages. So I think there was a Sanskrit class on the very first day. I remember that because it was the first time I'd actually heard Sanskrit. And I remember it was Elia who taught us a shloka. And how moved I was, how moving it was, and that, oh yes, this language, finally I will get to learn it. But languages were a problem, because all these kids who arrived and all these teachers who were here spoke a wide range of languages, and some of them no English. I think we, among the elders, we had no Hindi, so this became quite a problem. Ange was helpful. Ange was one of the first students. She'd been in the ashram school. For whatever reason, it was decided that she should be part of this new experiment, although her parents were in the ashram. And she was fluent in all the languages, so she was quite influential as an interpreter. So, and the building was more or less bare. We had a couple of very simple wooden beds issued by Prosperity, low beds which were used as tables. And Norman had received from the ashram handmade paper factory a beautiful gift of stacks and stacks of huge sheets of beautiful colored handmade paper. And somebody had provided a lot of scissors, and that was how we started on the first day. It was quite tough and confusing for everybody, I think. Well, gradually some kind of order began to establish itself, but from those very early days I would mention one feature which repeated itself. Anybody who had anything to do with education in the ashram was invited to come and give us advice. Yeah? And of course Norman was leading this train of people who came and told us how we should be doing things. And of course, really the aspiration was really very, very consciously that we want to give the kind of education that Mother and Sri Aurobindo have talked about. It was such a wonderful opportunity, you know, tabula rasa, absolutely, and we could make a start. But we found that all this advice, often it was very inspiring, very fascinating, but somehow we couldn't just implement it like that, because our conditions, the circumstances we were facing, were so different from what anybody else could imagine. They could tell us, you should do this and you should do that, but somehow we had to work it out on the ground ourselves. And I think this has been generally the history of Auroville education, that the people who were working with the children just had to find out by trial and error what worked. So we should just be very grateful to everybody who sincerely tried to do that, and whatever they did, each in their own way. We have no right to criticize or complain or anything, because nobody can imagine the challenges that people had to face. Mm-hmm. When on the first day, the midday meal, eagerly awaited, the kids were queuing up for it half an hour before it was ready. It was given in the existing community cafeteria, it was called, mm-hmm. along with all the residents of Aspiration. But Norman very early on decided that this was not at all a suitable environment for our children. And I think it was on the 1st of January that we were able to move into another very beautiful keep structure that I think had been designed and prepared by Johnny, more or less where the bakery is now. And that became the school kitchen. Eventually it became the community kitchen. And at one point even the school took over the running of the kitchen for the community. I think that was in 1973, if I'm not wrong. And so that formed quite a part of the history of our educational development. So that was one step towards our separate identity there. How do you build up an educational relationship with people when you've got no common language? No? I remember that I played a lot of games with children, snakes and ladders and Ludo and even chess and things like that, because you can develop a vocabulary, and you develop a relationship. We soon found ourselves splitting up into small groups. One adult would get on with this particular group of children and another with another group, and that also remained a kind of underlying pattern of our structure, compatibility groups. That meant not children of the same age together, or children, not necessarily children of the same linguistic background, but simply groups of people who could be together in one room for most of the day without trying to tear each other apart. Compatibility groups who could quietly get on with some kind of learning together. It was very interesting to see that develop. In April 1971, Mother sent me back to England for some time, and I returned in August of that year. And during that time while I was away, Shanti Shah came and joined. And this was such a grace, because she was a very highly experienced professional teacher. She'd been working with a big boarding school for underprivileged children in Gujarat. She's a person with a very intense spiritual aspiration and a marvelous way of relating to children, and for me, I must say, a miraculous organizing capacity. So from the moment that she arrived, the school started to come into shape. And when I came back in August, I brought with me from England a big tea chest full of books and music recordings. And it was actually possible for me, it had become possible to have a part of one of our Keat huts allocated, and I could start the first library. And that became quite a focal place. And during that first year, of course, we got various messages from Mother about the school, and people asked her various questions. So one of the questions Norman had asked was whether the holiday period should be the same as in the ashram school. And she had said yes, it could be. That means 1st of November to 15th of December is the holiday period. And I know it was probably in that first year that Anand Reddy had spoken to Mother about the model of education that she would like to see. I don't remember exactly what he wrote to her, but somehow the message was that a kind of Gurukula situation.
What does that mean?
So the Gurukula was the ancient Indian model of education, where those young people who had to be educated would go and live in the household of the main teacher, and they would all live together, so education would be a part of the whole life together. Breakfast, lunch, household chores, all this was, and then the storytelling in the evening, the daily worship, all this, the whole life would be an educational process. And somehow that vision came out, that perhaps individual Aurovillians would gather some kinds of small household around them for 24 hours a day. Education by influence and example rather than by formal lessons. That didn't really develop in the history of Aspiration School, but it was very much in our minds all the time. And by 1976, I remember we were really planning to create an environment where something like that could be done. I think that was all within the first year. So we had our break from 1st of November, and then the school reopened 16th of December. We thought we were very well prepared. We had lots of new books in the library. We'd ordered new furniture. We had actual classrooms, and we had teachers to teach specific subjects, and we had study areas, not only the library, but other study areas where groups could go. And then on opening day we got quite a shock, because another 50 kids we had not expected turned up. So among these were our first Tibetans.
Where did these kids come from, the 50?
Yeah, I'm just trying to count up who all they were. Of course, some of them were people who had joined Auroville in the meantime.
Yeah.
But I think the unexpected ones, it was the Tibetans. So this was actually, their coming was the result of a very beautiful inspiration. Tibetan students had been attending ashram school for, I think, quite many years. And one of them, Kathak, had settled in Pondicherry. He was recognized as a Rinpoche, so he was quite an influential person. And he had suggested to the Dalai Lama that, who had, by the way, endorsed the whole Auroville project, that orphan Tibetan children could be sent to grow up in Auroville. They'd be Aurovillians, but they would create the Tibetan pavilion in Auroville. So these children turned up. I mean, the youngest of them was very young, maybe only 5. Tashi, I think, was 7. The oldest one, Big Lobsang, he was maybe 11 or 12 when they came. We had no place for them in Auroville, so Kathak had provided something next to his carpet factory in Pondicherry. So they were among this group of children who came, and they had their breakfast in the Auroville kitchen. They got on the bus. They started fighting already at the breakfast table. They fought their way all the way to Auroville. They fought their way all the way through the day, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the idea would penetrate that, oh, after all, soon we'll be going back and we'd better show that we have learned something. So they would come along with their books that now we want to read. They had 2 lamas with them. Yeah. So that's part of the Tibetan story, that maybe I follow that thread a little way, that we very quickly began to feel that it was most important for these children to live in Auroville. The environment where they were with the carpet workers and all that was not at all ideal. And we presented Mother with a plan that each of these children could be sort of adopted into a Aurovillian family. We had people who were ready, willing, eager to take them. And in that way they'd become more integrated into Auroville, and we thought it was a great plan. And Mother said, no, on no account. They are here to represent their culture, and they have to be able to stay together in Pondi until there's a place for them in Auroville. And that's when she gave a beautiful message which has always meant a lot to me. She said, the unity we want to realize in Auroville is the divine unity, which is vast enough to embrace all differences. It was never written down, but it's engraved on my heart. So she didn't want this kind of assimilation process. So we set about trying, and eventually in June 1974 it was possible to start the Tamil, the Tibetan boarding, and yeah. So, but I've left December 16th, 1971. So the other biggish group who suddenly appeared out of the blue at that time were older children, that is to say already teenagers, whose parents had either been accepted for Auroville, or in some cases it was not the parents who were accepted for Auroville, but they were ready to give generous donations if their children could be accepted into the school. And there was a bunch of Bengali children. And this was quite difficult to cope with, because they'd come out of ordinary schools. And it was very interesting to notice that they had not learned much in their schools. What they had learned was how to deceive their teachers. And it took quite a while before those relationships of trust could be built up, that we weren't in this very weird situation. So, and then there were some younger, also Hindi-speaking children. Perhaps it was at that time that Jahangir and Rishad Rostomji, 2 Parsi boys, their mother joined Auroville and they came along with her. They were part of our school. And Peggy courageously took it upon her to take in some of the other children, so she was running a little boarding house in Aspiration for these younger ones. But we were much better organized by that time. I mean, really, you could say from December 71, in spite of this influx, it looked like a school.
Have you moved already then into the new building? Was that ready at that time, or when did you move in?
See, last school was already under construction when I came to Auroville. And as I remember the inauguration, again it was performed by André Dahl. This was maybe 6th of October, 71. So yes, in December 71 we had the use of last school, which we felt at that time was the most beautiful building on the planet. And it was decided that the very youngest children should make use of this facility. Mireille was looking after them, and Thomas. I don't remember who else. But quite early on, they found that this didn't work, that this was not really a suitable environment for very young children. We're going now into 1972.
Yeah.
We had a good school year through 1972 under Shanti's steering. And we had the visit of the Dalai Lama. So, visit of the Dalai Lama, by that time there'd been a change of management. Norman was out and Yvonne Artaud was in. Different, something quite different. She was really encouraging us to try all kinds of new things. But again, she only came once a week and gave her inspiring talks, and it became more and more clear that we had to manage the school ourselves, and the captain of the managing team, it clearly emerged that it was Shanti. And I think it must have been in the course of 1972 that it was reported to Mother that parents were not at all satisfied with the education their children were receiving. They were not learning to read and write, there was not enough general studies, these children were not being equipped for life, and so on. And Mother replied, if the parents are not satisfied with the education being given in the school, they may take their children elsewhere. And in many other ways also, she made it clear that she had confidence in the team and in what we were trying to do. There was one period when we, in this attempt to move towards no school, the ideal of no school, that the whole of Auroville is a learning environment, and the children and the adults, all of us are part of that. No? We decided that older children, we would find places where they could go into settlements, into working places, in ones and twos. Every morning they could go and learn on the spot certain things. It was an administrative nightmare, and eventually after 2 months or 3 months of sitting up till midnight doing scheduling, and then when the kids go to the place in the morning, the cow is sick and the fellow had to go for the vet and there's nobody there to receive them, and you know, these kind of things happening, we had to abandon it. But still, I mean, Mother sent us blessings for it. And there was particularly a question about whether Far Beach is a suitable place to send children. Gerhard was building a boat there, and we sent a couple of boys down there to work with him. And somebody asked Mother, should the children really be going to it was not to Far Beach? And Mother said, if Shanti is satisfied, it's all right. So If Shanti thinks it's a good idea, it's all right. So this gets passed down the administrative line, no? It was Shamsundar who was taking the messages and receiving the answers. So gradually confidence built up in our working. And so it's around this time that we have this structure which you referred to, with the children arriving on the bus in the morning, the assembly, everybody together, some quiet concentration, Sanskrit singing. Dipshika used to lead that. And then splitting up into these compatibility groups and using actually an environment that's stretched all the way from La Ferme, what was then called the Mango Grove, on the other side of the canyon from Aspiration, through Aspiration itself, the various buildings that were in use by the school. In the last school compound there was last school. Sanskrit school came up. I can't tell you exactly when. The pyramids was incomplete, but Shanti turned it into a series of laboratories where children could work independently with work cards and things like that. And then there was the kindergarten. Eliane Monnier had set that up. And further afield, we had the Tibetan boarding, which is where protection is now. And before the Tibetans moved in there to live, we did use it for groups. And then of course, as I mentioned, the kitchen, at some point we took over the management of the kitchen. So that was part of the school ambiance as well.
Quite a big area.
A big area, yes, spread over the whole of Auroville. So that's why it was important, these three activities that brought us all together. So assembly, and then the wonderful French kitchen, which had been set up by Alain and Eliane Monnier. First for the kindergarten children, then it was widened to accept the other children if they could behave like civilized beings. A French family, how do you behave? No, you have to help with setting the table and clearing the table. You have to show good manners the whole time that you are there. You're only allowed to eat this delicious food if you can behave properly. And they set it up in a very civilized way. And there you can see Shanti's amazing organizing capacity. Somehow, if somebody had a vision for an environment, she would just say yes and do everything possible to help them set it up. So they had beautiful furniture, beautiful polished tables and benches to sit on, and glasses and proper ceramic plates and white plates and knives and forks and everything, no? And this was educational in itself, of course. And all the children of all the backgrounds could eat there and came together there and made friendships there and knew that they're all part of one family. And the third unifying element was the sports in the afternoon. We had a big area, more or less where Selva's house is, Shakti is now. That was the sports ground. Anand Reddy had started the sports activities, and gradually people more connected with the ashram, they came out and helped with that, and that was how Kiran Padwa joined us originally for the sports. And Shraddhavan was quite a figure. He was a Bengali teacher, rather close to Nalini. So each of these adults, they had a special influence on a particular group of children, you know, and your children, I mean, the people that you interview, they will tell you who was their reference person, you know? But somehow Shanti, everybody was in touch with Shanti.
So what happened when Mother left her body, or how did things develop all of a sudden to this Putus meeting in 1976?
Well, to start with, things in the school did not change. Mother left in November 73, but not only she left in November 73, actually we hadn't been able to get any advice from her or anything since March, probably, 73. That's how I can date certain things. It must have been before that. But, of course, I think a significant moment in the history of Auroville is a meeting that happened in June 1974 or 5, now I don't know.
Okay.
Francis will remember that day. Navajata called a meeting under the banyan tree because it had become apparent over several months. Probably it was 75. Yeah, that there were serious disagreements between Shamsunda, who had been Mother's secretary for Auroville, and Navajata, who was the fundraiser and chairman of Sri Aurobindo Society. And he called that meeting for some kind of a public reconciliation. And it's one of my most painful memories. So I think from that time onwards it became more and more apparent in Auroville that we were having difficulties with the society. The Auroville Society was formed in November 1975 then. So this was a clear statement that Auroville needs to be independent of the society. And that led to an escalating conflict, which had become quite unpleasant by the following November 1976. There was a all-day concreting sometime during that month, and Croquette and Alain Monnier and Gordon Korstang, who was a kind of important figure in the school from the Tamil boarding, they were all working in the same section of the concreting, and as it went on they had a kind of discussion, and they came to a typically French conclusion that things couldn't go on the way they were. So even if we didn't know what was going to happen next, we had to change the way things are, including the school. And of course they were thinking particularly of the participation in the school of Navajat's daughter, Kiran, and other people who were based in the ashram. Michael Redbeard, Shraddhavan, probably those were the main ones. So a school meeting was called. Probably we anyway had planned to have a staff meeting for planning the coming year. And I know that Shanti and Kiran and I, what we wanted to propose was our next step towards no school. But then this political situation was very clearly put on the table. And it was suggested that certain changes should be made. Up to that point, the management had been being done by a smallish group of teachers, myself, Shanti, Kiran, Anand Reddy, Alan Monnier. That may have been all. Maybe one other person. And it was suggested that this should be changed, and that instead of this management by the school, there would be management by the Portus meeting, the new Auroville Residents' Assembly, you can say. And that those people working in the school who were not resident in Auroville should be requested either to come and live in Auroville or to leave the team. And similarly for students. And there were a couple of other decisions. Probably this is recorded somewhere, but I can't exactly say. But I think these were the two decisions. And I remember Shanti and myself also feeling the necessity for some kind of change, but foreseeing to a certain extent, not fully, we could not possibly have foreseen fully what it would mean, but foreseeing the effect on the children if Michael Redbeard, Shatadal, Kiran, some of the sports instructors, if these people were not coming anymore. I must say that for most of the children, Kiran really represented mother. And they felt such a love for her, and that what was coming from her was really the authentic thing. So we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to give our vote, and we didn't know what to do. And in our helplessness, we asked some of the children, "What do you think?" And they said, "Well, it would be good if Kirandi would come and stay in Auroville." So somehow we went along with it. It was a unanimous decision of the teachers. Suicide. It was absolute suicide. Because actually, who had been holding all that together? Who had been channeling the finance?
Yes.
Shanti.
Yes.
And she just found she couldn't function in this new atmosphere. So suddenly there was no finance, there was no structure, there was no school, there was no nothing. And, of course, the kids who lived in Aspiration, they experienced this very, very directly, because they saw our revolutionaries, our French revolutionaries, just move in and take over the school buildings and destroy their laboratories, which they'd been using, and that we had a fully employed carpenter who was just constantly doing things for the school, and they wouldn't even let him take his own tools away. Things like that, I mean it. And then, of course, finally, the library was disposed of, destroyed. And our Tibetan kids who had settled down in their boarding and formed themselves into a very orderly family. Suddenly they weren't orphans anymore. All their parents came and took them away. And of course there were people of goodwill in Auroville, people like Rod, Croquette, Johnny, I don't know, people who had said, yes, we will continue with the school. Even if Shanti and Shraddhavan drop out, we will run it. But it didn't work at all. So, sad story, that part.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Shraddhavan. I know it was painful in the last piece, but all the young people were just those who went through this, referred to it. So it was necessary that we just...
No, I think all of us, we are somehow connected now. These kids are all over 40, aren't they? I was just calculating. Anybody who was in SP be over 40.
Yes.
And but I think we all somehow feel connected by those happy memories.
Yeah.
Well, they all have happy memories.
Yes.